The snow was falling thick across the plains that morning, swallowing the horizon in a curtain of white. The wind cut sharp, howling through the wooden beams of the train station on the edge of Dodge Junction, a place where travelers came and went, but rarely stayed. The sky above carried no mercy, just endless steel-gray clouds that promised more blizzards before nightfall. At the far end of the platform, a young woman stood shivering, her frame fragile against the storm. Her coat was thin, borrowed from someone else, too large at the shoulders and too worn at the seams to keep her truly warm. A carpet bag rested at her boots, its handles frayed, and her gloved hands trembled as she pressed them close to her chest. She was a nurse by trade, but out here in the wild frontier that word meant very little. Nobody cared much for titles. They cared for survival. Her name was Clara Hayes, and she had boarded the train from Kansas City with a plan, though now it felt foolish. She was searching for work, a place that needed her, but the telegram she had received had been vague. Urgent need of medical help. Travel west. Your skills are life-saving. No name. No proper address. Only a promise written in hurried ink. She thought she would be greeted upon arrival. Instead, the station was empty, except for 2 railroad men packing crates and a telegraph operator who barely looked up from his desk. No one called her name. No one claimed her. As the cold sank deeper into her bones, Clara began to wonder if it had all been a cruel mistake. Then came the sound of hooves. Through the curtain of snow, a horse emerged, black as coal, its rider a figure wrapped in a long duster coat. A Stetson pulled low over his brow. He sat tall, commanding, the kind of man the West itself seemed to carve from dust and steel. The station master glanced up and nodded slowly. The rider dismounted, boots crunching into ice, and tied his horse to the post. When he pushed back the brim of his hat, the storm revealed his face. Handsome, rugged, yet refined in a way most cowboys weren't. His clothes, though dusted with snow, were tailored. His boots bore silver spurs. Around his wrist gleamed a watch finer than any common rancher could afford. The women in town whispered about him, and the men envied or despised him, for he was a legend in his own right. Samuel Ellison, the millionaire cowboy. His fortune had been built on cattle, land, and iron rails, and yet he still rode among the men who worked for him, branding cattle, breaking horses, enduring the same cuts and bruises as the rest. To some he was a paradox, wealthy beyond imagination but loyal to the saddle. Samuel's eyes landed on the shivering nurse by the platform, and something in his chest stirred. She looked lost, abandoned, her lips pale, her body trembling against the wind. For reasons he could not explain, he crossed to her without hesitation. "You'll freeze standing there," he said, his voice deep, carrying warmth against the cold. Clara looked up, startled, meeting the piercing blue of his gaze. For a moment she couldn't answer. His presence was overwhelming, larger than life, the kind of figure she had only read about in serialized dime novels back in Kansas City. "I was supposed to be met," she stammered, clutching her bag tighter. "But no one came." Samuel's brows drew together. "You a traveler, or you belong to someone here?" She straightened, fighting to keep her dignity despite the frost biting at her cheeks. "I am a nurse. I received word that help was needed here, though now I am beginning to think I was sent on a fool's errand." A gust of wind rattled the station windows. Samuel noticed her knees quivering beneath her skirts, her fragile shoes soaked through with snow. "You'll catch your death," he said, more firmly now. "Come with me. My ranch ain't far. Fire's lit, food on the stove. We'll sort out this business about the telegram once you're warm." Clara hesitated. Accepting such an invitation from a stranger, even a man of wealth, carried risk. But as her teeth chattered and the storm worsened, she realized she had no choice. With a nod, she lifted her bag, and Samuel took it from her hand with an ease that left her breathless. As he led her to his horse, Clara caught the eyes of the telegraph operator. The old man gave her a knowing look, as if fate had shifted in that moment, as if history itself had begun to write a new page. And perhaps it had. For when Samuel Ellison lifted Clara Hayes onto his horse and rode into the storm, the story of their love began. but neither of them knew that it would grow to be a tale spoken in hushed voices across the frontier, a legend of hardship, devotion, and sacrifice that would echo long after both their names were carved into stone. The snowstorm did not relent as Samuel Ellison's black stallion carried them across the frozen plains. Clara clung to the saddle, her hands stiff beneath her gloves, her breath clouding in the night air. The rancher's arm held her steady, a wall of warmth in the merciless cold. The ride felt endless, but at last, through the sheets of snow, a cluster of lanterns glowed on the horizon. Wooden fences emerged, and beyond them stretched the Ellison Ranch, one of the largest spreads west of the Missouri. The main house rose tall against the storm, its wide porch lined with rocking chairs and its windows blazing with firelight. Barns and bunkhouses dotted the land, their roofs buried under white drifts. Cattle huddled in pens, their lowing muffled by the blizzard. Clara had never seen anything like it. In Kansas City, wealth meant brick mansions with marble steps. But here, wealth was measured in land, cattle, and men willing to ride in any weather. They pulled up to the porch, and Samuel swung down with a grace that only years in the saddle could give. He reached up, steadying Clara as she dismounted, his hand strong around her waist. Her cheeks flushed, though whether from the cold or his nearness, she could not say. The door opened before they reached it, and a tall woman stood framed by the firelight inside. She was lean, her hair streaked with gray, her eyes sharp as flint. "Lord above, Samuel Ellison," she scolded, hands on her hips. "What stray have you dragged in this time?" "This here's Clara Hayes," Samuel answered, brushing snow from his hat. "She's a nurse. Found her freezing at the station." The woman's gaze swept over Clara from boots to bonnet, not unkind, but skeptical. "A nurse, is it? We'll see. Come in, child, before you turn to ice." Inside, the warmth hit Clara like a wave. The main hall was grand for the West. Rugged timber beams overhead, a stone fireplace crackling with pine, Navajo rugs stretched across the floor. Mounted antlers and oil lamps cast shadows across polished wood furniture. Men's voices echoed faintly from deeper in the house, laughter mixed with the rattle of poker chips. The older woman thrust a quilt into Clara's hands. "Name's Martha. Been running this household near 20 years. Don't take much stock in strangers, but if Samuel brought you, I suppose you'll do. Sit by the fire before your teeth chatter clean out of your head." Clara obeyed, sinking into the warmth. Her boots steamed as the frost melted from them, and color slowly returned to her cheeks. She looked around, feeling out of place among the polished grandeur and the watchful eyes of portraits on the wall. Ellisons of generations past, men who had carved this empire from the dirt. Samuel shed his duster and hung it by the door. Even in simple shirt sleeves, he carried an air of command. The poker game fell silent when he stepped into the parlor. Every ranch hand respected him, not just for his wealth, but for the fact that he worked harder than any of them. Still, tonight, their eyes followed Clara with suspicion. A murmur rose among them. One whispered, "What's he doing bringing in some city girl?" Another spat tobacco into the fire and muttered, "She won't last a week." Samuel heard them but said nothing. He walked back to Clara and crouched by the hearth, his gaze steady. "You warm enough now?" She nodded, though her voice still shook. "Yes, thank you, Mr. Ellison." "Samuel," he corrected gently. "Ain't no need for formality in this house." Her eyes met his. And for the first time since leaving Kansas City, she felt safe. Yet beneath that safety lurked a question that would not leave her. Why had she been sent here? Who had written that telegram? The answer came sooner than expected. The front door burst open, snow whipping inside, and a ranch hand staggered in, carrying a boy no older than 12. Blood stained the boy's sleeve, his face pale as death. "Boss," the man cried. "He took a fall off the horse, arms busted, bleeding bad." Chaos erupted. Men shouted, furniture scraped, and Martha barked orders for hot water. But Samuel's eyes shot to Clara. "You're a nurse," he said, voice low but commanding. "Prove it." Clara froze, every eye in the room turning on her. This was her test, her purpose, the reason fate, or something greater, had dragged her across frozen plains. She pushed back the quilt, stood and set her jaw. "Clear the table," she ordered, "and bring me whiskey. Not to drink, for the wound." The men hesitated. unused to being commanded by a slip of a woman. But Samuel's voice cut through. "Do as she says." Within moments, the dining table was stripped. The boy laid upon it, lanterns pulled close. Clara rolled up her sleeves, her hands steady now, her training taking over. She cleaned the wound, set the bone, stitched torn flesh with precise fingers. The boy cried out, but she soothed him with a calm, steady voice. When it was done, and the boy rested with his arm in a splint, silence filled the room. The ranch hands stared at her, awe replacing doubt. Martha folded her arms, lips twitching at the corner. "Well," she muttered, "maybe this stray's worth keeping after all." Samuel looked at Clara, his expression unreadable. But inside something shifted. This woman was not weak. She was not a burden. She was fire wrapped in fragile skin, and he knew already that she would change everything. Outside, the storm raged on. But inside the Ellison ranch, history had just taken its first breath. The days that followed the storm unfolded like pages in a book Clara never imagined herself living. By dawn, the ranch was alive with motion, men saddling horses, cattle bellowing across the frozen fields, smoke curling from the bunkhouse chimneys. Clara had thought her place would be hidden in the background, perhaps preparing poultices or tending quietly to the sick. But the Ellison ranch was no place for shadows. Here, every soul had a role to play, and hers was tested from the moment she stepped into the light of day. The boy whose arm she had mended, Thomas, recovered swiftly. Within days he was back to running through the yard, though his splint clattered against every doorframe he brushed past. The men who once doubted her now gave her cautious nods of respect. Still, not all were convinced. One evening, as Clara carried fresh bandages into the barn, she overheard two cowhands whispering, "She ain't one of us," one muttered. "Mark my words, she's here for his money." "Or his name," the other sneered. Women sniff after Samuel Ellison like coyotes after blood. "This one's just smarter at hiding it." Clara's hands tightened on the linen, her face burning. She turned away before they could see the tears prickling in her eyes. But Samuel was not blind. He noticed the whispers, the sidelong glances, the way Clara held her shoulders stiff when she walked past the men. That night, after supper, he found her in the quiet of the porch, staring out at the snowfields, the stars glittering cold above them. "You'll have to forgive him," he said softly, leaning against the rail. "Men out here don't take kindly to change. They trust what they know and what they don't. They fear." Clara turned, her breath a small cloud in the night air. "And what do you think, Samuel? Do you think I came here chasing fortune?" He studied her, his eyes as steady as the horizon. "I think you'd have frozen to death before you'd admit weakness. I think you got more grit in you than most men I've known. And I know this much. You saved Thomas's arm when none of us could have done it. That's worth more than all the cattle on this land." For the first time, Clara smiled in his presence, small, trembling, but real. Yet not all hearts on the ranch were softened by her presence. Martha, though outwardly cordial, watched Clara with a hawk's eye. She had run the household for decades, and Samuel's bachelorhood had given her unspoken authority. But Clara's presence threatened to shift that balance. More than once, Martha's sharp words cut into Clara's confidence. "You stitched well enough," she said one morning, nodding at Thomas's arm. "But a house is more than wounds and bones. Do you know how to make bread rise in high plains air? Do you know which herbs keep men from fever in the dead of winter? This ranch don't run on city schooling, child. It runs on know-how." Clara bit her tongue, swallowing the sting. She spent nights reading the journals Martha thrust at her, memorizing recipes and remedies, determined not to falter. Then came Annabelle Carter. She arrived on a crisp Sunday afternoon, stepping down from a polished carriage with boots that never touched mud. Annabelle was the daughter of a neighboring land baron, draped in silk and confidence, her hair coiffed in curls that glittered like gold in the sunlight. She swept into the ranch house as if she belonged there, her laughter echoing like silver bells. "Samuel!" she exclaimed, embracing him with familiarity that made Clara's stomach twist. "You disappear for weeks and never write." "I simply had to see you." The ranch hands smirked knowingly, some tipping hats in greeting. Annabel had long been spoken of as Samuel's likely bride, a union that would merge two empires of land and cattle. Clara stood at the edge of the room, unnoticed, clutching a tray of tea Martha had pressed into her hands. Annabel's eyes flicked over her, dismissive, like one might glance at a servant. "And who?" Annabel asked sweetly, though with venom beneath the sugar. "Is this?" Samuel hesitated, then turned to Clara. "This is Miss Clara Hayes. She's staying here, helping with doctoring." Annabel's smile tightened. "A nurse, then? How quaint." Clara felt the words like a slap. She lowered her gaze, heat flooding her cheeks. Later that night, alone in the bunkhouse kitchen, Clara pressed her hands against the wooden counter, fighting tears. She had crossed states, endured storms, saved lives, and yet, under Annabel Carter's gaze, she felt small, insignificant, like she had no place here. But Samuel noticed. When the household had gone quiet, he found her again, candlelight flickering against his face. "You don't belong serving tea," he said firmly. "Not in this house." Clara shook her head, voice trembling. "I don't belong at all. Annabel, she's everything you are. Wealth, land, family, and me? I'm nothing more than a nurse who got lost in a snowstorm." Samuel stepped closer, his presence filling the small kitchen. He placed a hand on the counter beside hers, leaning close enough that she could see the fire in his eyes. "You listen to me, Clara Hayes," he said, his voice low, steady as thunder rolling across the plains. "You are not nothing. You're the first person to walk into this house who ain't afraid to stand tall. And I swear, one day, every man and woman on this ranch will see what I see when I look at you." Clara's heart pounded, her breath caught. She could not speak, not when the weight of his words settled inside her like a spark catching flame. But fate, as always, had its own designs. The very next day, a telegram arrived. And with it, danger that would test not only their growing bond, but the very survival of the Ellison ranch. The telegram came at sunrise, carried by a boy on horseback with frost clinging to his lashes. Samuel broke the seal with steady hands, though the moment his eyes scanned the message, the fire in the hearth seemed to dim. Clara watched from across the room, her heart quickening at the shift in his expression. His jaw clenched, his eyes darkened. When he folded the slip of paper, the weight of it seemed heavier than iron. "What is it?" she asked carefully. He hesitated before answering. "Trouble. Down south near the rail line. Outlaws been raiding stock trains. They're making their way north." Martha, who had been pouring coffee, froze mid-motion. "If they reach this ranch, they won't," Samuel cut in, his voice hard as steel. But Clara caught the flicker of worry in his eyes. For days, tension thickened like storm clouds over the ranch. Riders were posted on the perimeter. Rifles were cleaned. Ammunition stocked. The ranch hands muttered about gangs led by men with no mercy, men who'd burned entire towns to ash. And in the midst of it all, Annabel Carter lingered like a golden shadow, her presence both comfort and torment. She clung to Samuel, offering smiles, promises of alliances, and veiled threats that her father's men could protect Ellison land if Samuel bound himself to her in marriage. Clara saw it all, though she tried to keep her distance. She poured her efforts into tending the men, preparing herbs for fevers and mending worn hands split by the cold. But whispers followed her. "She'll be the ruin of him," one ranch hand muttered after she passed. "A man like Samuel needs power by his side. Not some nurse with nothing but bandages." At night, Clara sat by her small window, staring at the endless white fields, her heart torn between leaving before she caused more pain, or staying, though every moment deepened a bond that felt dangerous in its intensity. The decision was taken from her when the first shots rang out. It was near dusk, the sky aflame with streaks of orange and violet. The outlaws came fast, a blur of horses and dust against snow, their rifles cracking like thunder. Men shouted, dogs barked, cattle scattered in terror. Clara ran from the house, skirts whipping in the wind as Samuel mounted his stallion, barking orders. "Hold the south fence! Keep the herd tight! Don't let 'em breach the barn!" The gang was ruthless, masked men with fire in their eyes. One hurled a torch toward the hay barn, and flames licked the dry wood instantly. Without thinking, Clara sprinted toward it. Martha screamed after her, but Clara plunged into the smoke, dragging buckets of water, shouting for help. Her lungs burned, her hands blistered, but she did not stop. When she stumbled out, coughing, Samuel was there pulling her against his chest. His face was streaked with soot, his eyes wild. "Are you mad?" he roared. "You could have been killed." "I couldn't just stand by," she cried, voice raw. "This is your home, Samuel. It's theirs too. If it burns, what do they have left?" Their eyes locked, the world spinning with fire and gunfire around them, and in that moment, Samuel saw what no storm, no outlaw, no rival could erase. Clara Hayes was not a guest in his life. She was a force, fierce and unyielding, but the battle was far from over. The outlaws fell back into the dark, leaving smoke and blood behind. Several ranch hands lay wounded. Samuel himself bore a gash across his arm deep enough to stain his sleeve scarlet. Clara worked tirelessly through the night, stitching, binding, soothing. Her fingers trembled not from fear but from exhaustion. As dawn crept pale across the plains, the ranch lay in ruin but not defeated. The barn stood charred but upright. The herd, though scattered, was safe. The men, though bloodied, were alive. Samuel found Clara slumped in a chair, her hands stained with blood and soot, her face streaked with ash. She had fallen asleep upright, her body too worn to continue. For a long moment, he simply stood there, watching her. Around them, the ranch stirred with weary survival. But Samuel knew the truth. None of it would have endured without her. And just as the first rays of sun touched the blackened fields, Samuel Ellison made a vow, not to his men, not to the land, but to himself. Whatever trials came, whatever storms or enemies rose against them, he would not let Clara Hayes slip from his life, because love, he realized, was not found in ballrooms or alliances. It was forged in fire, in blood, in the quiet courage of a woman who had walked out of the snow and into his soul. The fire had burned low, reduced to embers, but the scars of the night were etched deep into the ranch. Fences splintered, pastures blackened, men walking with bandaged arms and limps. Yet for all the ruin, there was survival, hard-earned and undeniable. Samuel stood at the edge of the porch, his shirt sleeve torn, the gash in his arm wrapped in Clara's careful stitching. His gaze swept across his land, and for the first time in years, he felt the weight of his fortune not as pride, but as burden. What use was gold or cattle if it could be turned to ash overnight? Behind him, Clara emerged, her hair loose, her hands still stained faintly with blood and soot. She stepped quietly, but Samuel heard her all the same. His senses had begun to notice her even before she moved, as if her presence had carved itself into the rhythm of his days. "You should rest," she said softly. He glanced at her, and though exhaustion shadowed her face, there was light in her eyes, the kind of light a man could follow through darkness and storms. "I will," he murmured. "Once I know you're safe." She shook her head, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "I'm stronger than I look." "I know." His voice held no doubt, only truth. For a long moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by the crackle of the dying fire and the distant low of cattle. Then Samuel spoke words he had not intended, but could no longer hold back. "You've changed this place, Clara. You've changed me." Her breath caught. The world seemed to pause, the dawn painting the horizon gold. Before she could answer, the sound of carriage wheels shattered the moment. Annabelle Carter swept onto the ranch like a storm in silk, her carriage drawn by two gleaming horses. She stepped down, her dress immaculate despite the mud, her eyes cold fire as they landed on Clara. "I heard about the attack," Annabelle said, her voice dripping with false concern. "Samuel, you need protection, real protection. My father's men could guard this ranch. All it would take is one word. One vow." Her meaning was clear. The vow of marriage. The ranch hands paused in their work, sensing the weight of the moment. Martha appeared in the doorway, her lips pressed thin. Clara stood frozen, the ash of battle still on her skin, facing a woman who seemed born to this world of wealth and power. Annabelle stepped closer, her eyes cutting to Clara. "And this? This nurse you've dragged in from the snow? Do you think she belongs here? In your house, Samuel. At your side?" Clara's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, but doubt gnawed at her. Annabelle was everything Samuel was supposed to have: wealth, lineage, influence. Clara was nothing but a healer with calloused hands and a borrowed coat. But Samuel did not hesitate. He stepped between them, his voice ringing across the yard with the weight of command. "She belongs here more than anyone I've ever known." Gasps rippled among the men. Annabelle's face blanched, fury sparking in her eyes. "You'd throw away everything? An empire, for her?" Samuel's jaw hardened. "This empire ain't worth a damn if she ain't part of it." The words struck like thunder. Clara felt them in her very bones, shaking loose every fear, every shadow of doubt. Tears stung her eyes, not from weakness, but from the overwhelming force of what he had declared. Annabelle's lips curled. "You'll regret this, Samuel Ellison. My father does not take insults lightly." She turned, skirts snapping like a whip, and climbed into her carriage. The wheels churned up mud as the horses lunged forward, carrying her fury back toward the horizon. When the dust settled, silence hung heavy. The ranch hands exchanged looks, some shocked, some smiling faintly. Martha sighed, shaking her head, but there was no venom in her eyes now, only resignation. Samuel turned to Clara, his chest rising and falling with the fire still coursing through him. He reached for her hand, rough fingers wrapping around hers, grounding her. "I don't care what they say, Clara. I don't care what comes from Annabelle or her father. You walked into my life out of a storm, and I ain't letting you walk out again." Clara's lips trembled, but this time she did not hold back. "And I won't leave. Not if you'll have me." The ranch seemed to exhale around them, as though the land itself had been waiting for this vow. Samuel drew her close, his forehead against hers, and for the first time since the blizzard at the train station, Clara felt truly warm. The years that followed were not without struggle. Annabelle's father sent men to intimidate, to sabotage, but they were repelled. The ranch grew stronger, rebuilt by hands that believed in it. Clara's skill as a healer saved countless lives. Ranch hands, settlers, even travelers passing through. Word spread of the nurse who had faced fire and outlaw steel, and of the cowboy who had chosen love over power. Their marriage was spoken of not as convenience, but as legend. Together they weathered storms, droughts and battles of will, and each time, their bond grew fiercer. In time, history remembered them not as millionaire and nurse, but as something greater, a pair who defied the rules of the frontier, who proved that love could be forged in fire and endure against all odds. And it all began on a winter night, at a lonely train station, where a freezing nurse met a cowboy who refused to let her die.